Good afternoon, YouTubers. Here I am again with my intention, which is to help you to liberate your minds. Now, it's winter coming up and, stress is going on. So again, I think my focus at the moment is kind of continuing on from what I was talking about last time, which is kind of helping you out of your mental funk. Like people that tend to make challenging conditions and situations worse for themselves. So let's talk about how they do that. And then I'm going to give you a very simple word stroke tool to help you to get out of it and to improve your day so that you become more of a half full glass person rather than half empty. So let's talk about how reality is made up and then what people do with it. So basically, this is a concept I took from a very good friend and mentor of mine, Brad Henning, and he talks about it as there are three parts to every pattern, and that is what's actually going on in the situation that you're experiencing out here, the real world. The middle part is the meaning that we give it. So once it goes through all the filters in here, the meaning we give it, and then of course there's the way it makes us feel, right? Which is the final part. And then obviously that drives our behaviors and our reactions to things. So if we were to sort of talk about which part of that is the issue and the part that you have some control over, it would be the middle bit, right? What the meaning you give it, the interpretation. And so we have to be a little bit careful about what we talk ourselves into, the stories we tell ourselves, right? And human beings tend to do three things with information that come in. They tend to distort that information, and they tend to generalize that information, and they tend to delete things. Why do they do that? So that it fits their model, their map of the world, according to them, according to all kinds of factors like their upbringing, their belief systems, their values, their way of thinking about things, their personality types, all of that to fit that. And this is why I, as a therapist, have to be very on it when it comes to people's language, because I can tell from the language that they're giving me what they've done with the information, whether they're distorting it. So let me give you a couple of examples. So if we talk about distortion, maybe someone says something to me like, that person doesn't like me, right? And I will be like, what makes you say that? I just know, right? And I will have to pick them up on that because are they a mind reader? So that's interesting. Are you psychic? How do you know that for sure? And they won't be able to tell me simply because they don't know. But they have convinced themselves. It's almost like they're hypnotizing themselves into believing something and they're distorting the information that way when it gets into here. So someone has said or done something and then they have made it mean something and therefore it makes them feel a certain way, which then dictates how they are. So if they maybe then delete information and they'll just say, well, that's just the way it is. And I'll say, according to who? Like, who's decided that? Where did that come from? I have to challenge that. They've deleted the most important part of the information there, which is, who's decided that? When did you decide that? Who's stating those rules, right? And generalizations, you'll hear these words all the time when everybody, always, never, these kinds of words are generalizing. They'll say, I've never been happy. Never. You came out the womb unhappy. And of course, they'll have to say, well, obviously I wasn't born like that. And I'll say, well, listen to the words you're saying, right? They're hypnotizing themselves into feeling bad, right? And then that drives the behavior. They create a construct of negativity. So be mindful of what you're saying. So let's now move into what I like to remind people to do with situations, right? And that's reframe. What do I mean by reframe? It simply means the same situation, you don't just have one interpretation for it. You might reframe it and ask yourself, what else could it mean, right? What other explanations are there for what you've just witnessed? Or what other interpretations could there be of that? And hopefully, if you're looking for the positives and giving people the benefit of the doubt or thinking in those positive ways and reframing it like that, you're probably going to keep up here more of the time rather than going down there into that primitive part of your brain where you're stressed and you start thinking negatively habitually like that, right? Because that happens automatically when you're down there. So if you can catch it though quickly enough, because there are two roads into the brain. There's the fast, which is the low road, which goes straight to the amygdala in that primitive part of the brain. And then there's the high road, which takes longer, which goes through your rational thought thinking part of the brain. And there is a window of opportunity in which you can talk yourself either into a negative state or out of it, unless it's an instant trauma response. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about that window of opportunity where your interpretation makes a huge difference to you, in which case you can reframe the situation. So let's give you a couple of an example of that. When people's come to me for they've got anxiety going on, they're experiencing anxious states, right? Because anxiety isn't a thing. It's not like an affliction or an illness. It's a state. It's temporary. It comes and goes. And even if you feel anxious quite a lot of the time, it's still a state. And a state is a behavior, and a behavior can be changed, right? So what if we were to reframe the meaning for you? So instead of anxiety being this scary thing that I have to be frightened of, that I'm terrified is going to kick in, which causes anxiety in the first place, what if we realized and bring it back to this idea that everything your brain and body does has a positive intention? So I will ask them, so you perceive it as this frightening thing, what else could it mean? Knowing that it has a positive intention, what is the purpose of your body doing this thing to you, this reaction that happens in your body? It's trying to keep you safe. So the next time you start to feel some anxiety or an anxious state in the body, if you were to say to yourself, oh, it's just almost like the inner child, because your unconscious mind's like a 6-year-old that never grows up, the nervous system, it's almost like a child saying, I'm afraid, or I don't feel safe to go and do that, or speak to that person, or whatever it might mean. You can think of it a bit like, if we used a metaphor, like, you know, the bumps at the side of the motorway when it starts to go gadunk, gadunk, gadunk. It's like telling you something, isn't it? The message is you're about to veer off the motorway because you're falling asleep, right? So if you think about it as more like a warning signal to just tell you that there is a need. So maybe ask yourself that. What is it that your body needs in that moment? And we can talk about that in terms of all what we would consider to be negative emotions, right? They aren't really negative and positive emotions. Emotions are emotions. They're just energies flowing through the body, chemicals, reactions, right? And if it makes you feel any better, the longest they will last is 90 seconds. So even if you could just sit with an emotion without adding another log on the fire by then thinking negatively about it and reframing the situation and asking that question, what is this feeling trying to tell me? What does it need? Like if you had a feeling about somebody and it didn't feel good, it's like maybe your body's trying to say that's not the right person for you, right? Or if you are feeling angry about something, it could be your body's way of trying to protect you from something. Whatever it might mean, listen to your guidance system, right? Instead of living up here all the time. So reframing them, think of your emotions as, especially negative ones, as more of an opportunity. It's telling you that there is some work to do here. If you're going into what we would consider to be a safe, normal situation, but your body is acting in a very extreme emotional way, that's almost like a signpost. It's a warning signal to tell you that there is something going on here. There is some work to do. And it's an opportunity to learn, to grow, to heal, if you don't ignore it, if you don't try and numb it or avoid it or hide it or do anything except want to feel it or go and investigate, go towards it. So reframe it. It's an opportunity. And I actually program myself to actually see every negative feeling as a positive now, because it tells me something and it goes, oh, that was really interesting. I didn't know that was still an issue for me. And if you think about it like that, it completely changes your perspective about it. Something else that people will do is say things like those beliefs again, right? They have beliefs about things. We talked about that. So like my boss is always really angry with me, which means he or she doesn't like me. These kinds of phrases, we talked a bit about that. So again, reframing it, what else could it mean? Maybe the reason they try and control everything is because they're really insecure. Maybe it's because they've got some issues going on at home. It could be any number of scenarios. So instead of making it personal and making it mean something about you and then reacting as if that's a fact when it's not, which gets you into trouble because then you might start acting weirdly around that person, which then makes them feel uncomfortable. And then you're creating a situation. And then, of course, when they start acting like that to you, like, see, I knew it, but you didn't. You created that by your assumptions and your generalizations and all of that kind of good stuff. So what's the answer to all of this? It's to start to take a step back and reframe the situation, right? What else could this mean? What is another interpretation of this? What else could this mean about the situation? What else could this mean about me? What else could this mean about the world? And just start to see it more rationally and as it is, rather than letting it go through all these filters and you coming up with something. And think, I'm making a choice to be a glass half full kind of person. That's the basis of solution-focused therapy in itself. We only want you looking for having positive thoughts, interactions with people, and taking positive actions. And even if something isn't going well, we're not saying it's all sunshine and rainbows, but what we're saying is, how can you find the positive in that situation? Or if there isn't a positive to be found, what can you do that's more proactive and solution focused about it, rather than turning on yourself or the situation, making it negative, and then getting sucked down into that negative spiral that doesn't take you anywhere good? You have a choice. You can either be a victim or you can be someone that's solution focused and a victor, right? So the other thing to say is, be present. When you're living in the future or the past all the time, it's not real, right? And especially if you're running it through those filters of making a model of the world that isn't particularly positive for yourself. So just be present and be grateful. Because when you're grateful for what you do have, then you're just going to be in a better place, basically. And it's really good for you to do that as well. So I hope that was helpful. So the thing to take away is reframe, be solution focused. And even if you can't be positive, look for proactive ways to handle that situation rather than letting your mind hijack you down into that. You've got a window of time before that becomes, you fully trigger down into that primitive part of the brain. So use that time to think in that way, a more positive, solution-focused way. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and maybe share it or write a comment. I'd love to know what you'd like me to do videos on or what you thought of this video. Have a wonderful afternoon, and I'll see you again soon.